Okay, welcome to this, the fifth part of the fundamentals of 3D modeling for games. In this part, we're going to be taking a look at texturing the stylized car using Substance Painter. I've got Substance Painter here open, and my low poly car has been imported. Of note, in order to speed up this process, my bakes have already been complete. Just so that we don't sit here and watch my system go through the process of baking, it would be a lot better if we actually just had the bakes here done. So that's what I'm going to do. I am going to show you the process that I use for baking so that you can set your settings up the same if you would like to do so. And that'll give you the opportunity to do your own bakes. Again, my bakes are already complete here. So again, just to go over what I've got here, the car is in Substance Painter. I have 4 different material IDs that I'm looking at here where the meshes have been split up into different sections. Each of these sections is going to get its own set of textures. If I go to the texture set settings here, this is where we're going to do our baking. So in here, when you first open up Substance Painter, this will be empty. Since I've already completed my baking, all of my maps have been filled. Let's go take a look at how the baking process is completed. I'm going to open the button here called Bake Mesh Maps. With that open, we're going to get the preview of the parameters here for the baking. This little window, this dialog, will give us the properties of the bakes that are going to happen. Now, important to note, the first thing here we're going to look at is resolution. And this resolution that I'm baking, these are for the additional textures. These are not for the resolution of the final textures that are going to exist for this asset. But these are for the textures that are going to be used, the 7 different maps here that get used throughout the process of creating textures. I generally try and keep this pretty high. This ensures that I get the highest quality possible out of my substances. So I'm going to be doing 4 4K maps. Again, a little oversized, but I'd rather work larger than smaller. And I'm going to be doing a output size here of 4K as well. I've got my dilation turned up to 16 pixels. I've gone and loaded my high poly car. I've gone and switched the match mesh by name. Anti-aliasing, I'll turn up to 8 times. And we're going to use the default suffixes here that Substance uses. So underscore high, underscore low with no capital letters. For the normal map, there are no parameters. And for the world space map, there are no parameters. The ID map, I do want to switch this until it says mesh ID or polygroup. The ambient occlusion, I'll keep this off for a second here. We don't want to bake this just yet. This is a pretty expensive map to build. And if I try and bake it now with these settings, we're going to find that it's just going to take forever to process our bake. So I'm gonna leave that one off. The curvature, I'll turn on, and the position I'll turn on. Again, both of those properties for those 2 maps here, I'm going to leave them just as default. Now, again, back in the common parameters here, one of the ones that I do want to make sure I have turned on is my anti-aliasing. And I've currently got this set to subsampling at 8x8. So this is going to essentially blur a very slight amount the images that get baked in order to make them look a little bit smoother than the resolution that we're using. Now, with 4 different material IDs, it is important that you hit the Bake All Texture Sets here. If you don't hit this button, you're going to bake for essentially just the current material ID that you have selected, and we don't want to do that. When that bake is completed, I will then go through and turn off the categories here, the maps that I've just baked, and turn on the 2 that I have not yet baked. I'll then go into my subsampling here, and we'll turn that off. And then I'll go into my my settings here for the ambient occlusion, and I'm going to bring up the number of rays here to 256, and we're going to apply that to all. And thickness, again, same deal, 256, and apply to all. This apply to all button here makes sure that this 256 secondary rays applies to more than just the first material here, but we'll go through all of our different material IDs and apply that setting. So that said, I would then hit Bake All Textures again and wait for the software to complete that baking. Now again, we're not going to sit here and watch that happen. So I'm just going to close this window, and I now actually have all 7 maps. The software will go and place all 7 of these into the proper slots of each of the material IDs. So if I go choose another material ID here, it will contain its own 7 maps. And this is probably a good point to go and save your file. It normally does take quite some time in order to bake these things, and so going in and saving your file will prevent you from having to bake again. Okay, now since the get-go here, we've been texturing or making this car based off some reference images of that stylized car. And in order to start getting a little bit of variety and to start getting a little bit more separation between all of the ones that we're all making, I'm going to now break away from the concept art and do a custom paint job on my version of this car. I'm going to be doing this based off a Mini Cooper, so I've gone and Googled a Mini Cooper here, and I found this one here that I like. Now, it is important that you don't just make the one I'm making, but you put your own spin on this. You can go and find various paint jobs on these things and go and emulate those, or you can make up your own paint job as well. I decided I was going to make this one. I really did like the color combinations here, and so that is what I'm going to be using as the reference image for the vehicle I'm going to be making. So I've dragged that over. It's on my secondary monitor now here, so you're not going to see this as I go, but I'm going to be paying attention to that along the way, just because it's always important to have a good set of reference while you're working. Okay, so to begin with, I'm going to go into my layers. I'm in the, let's start with the paint layer here. This is the main body of the car. Substance Painter will go and add a brand new layer here to each of our material IDs. This is by default. I'm just going to get rid of that. I tend to not use their material IDs very much. And I'm going to start by going in and adding the basic white paint that exists on this car. So I'm going to go add a fill layer. And I'm going to rename the fill layer right away, Paint Base. This is just going to be the basic layer of my paint. And in the properties for that fill layer, I'm going to go and turn on the properties that I would like to have here. And that is essentially going to be everything with the exception of the height and the normal. I'm not going to be putting any information into those 2 channels on this particular layer. So I'll just go in and turn them off. The next thing that I'm going to need to do here is start to get something that looks like the white paint in the vehicle. Now, when I go and look at the image here, I'm looking at reflectivity in the vehicle. Obviously, this is going to be a white paint job. This does look like it's a little bit on the gray side of white. This isn't a brilliant sheen of white here. If I go and look at some of the pixels in the little bit of the headlight here that we can see, I can see that those are quite a bit brighter. That is the chrome. That's a reflection of the sky. And so this does look to be a little off-white to me. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into that base color, and I'll go and grab something a little bit off-white. Our metallic value, I'm going to leave at 0 here. I do not wish to have any metal value inside the car. Okay. So with a metallic value set at 0, I'm going to go into the roughness now, and I'm going to adjust the roughness. Obviously, this is a fairly shiny vehicle, and so I'm going to want to have some sheen up here in the roughness. So I'm kind of looking at my vehicle in the same kind of directionality here that I can see in the reference image, and it looks like something like 0.09 in my roughness is going to read okay. Now again, if you're doing an older vehicle, if you're doing something that's meant to be a little more damaged and dirty, then obviously you're going to want to try and match that in your paint job. My reference image, I have a very highly reflective vehicle, and so that's what I'm going to try and place. The next thing I'm going to approach is the the little bit of a paint job that's on here. So there are racing stripes, 2 of them that run along the center of the vehicle. They are red in color, and they essentially run straight down, right down the middle of the vehicle here, right down Main Street. And so I'm going to need to add that as a additional color to my paint base. So the paint base here, this is going to be the white, and I'm going to add another layer, and this is going to be, I'll just call it my stripes, and this is going to be a layer that contains only color. It'll inherit the metal rough, normal, and height from the layer below it. And so this is going to allow me to paint some red stripes on the vehicle. Now, in order to get these red stripes painted in a way that works correctly, that matches what I'm seeing in the reference material here, I'm going to look at my car essentially straight from the top, and I'm going to remove the perspective and go into an orthographic view. This is essentially like looking at the top camera in a vehicle, or in a software package rather. And so with this view, I'm going to be able to now place a set of stripes along the vehicle, and I'm going to make sure that these stripes are completely parallel all the way through. The reason that the orthographic allows this to happen, essentially if I was to switch this over to perspective, the stripes would be larger and thicker here on the top of the vehicle, and then they would thin out down below. So going into orthographic, this is going to allow me to paint these stripes in without having any change in the way that things are working. Now, I'm going to go into symmetry mode here. I'm going to place the symmetry plane on. It is going right down the center of the vehicle, which is quite nice. That's going to allow me to make sure that whatever I paint on one side of the vehicle is going to appear on the second side of the vehicle. The other thing that I might want to do here is add a stencil. This is going to essentially mask out the vehicle in places where I don't want to paint. And so if I were to go in here and look for a, let's see, square, and we were to go look for squares, here's a square shape here. That's nice. It's, in the wrong direction, the wrong place. It's in the wrong kind of orientation here in relation to my vehicle. Now, important to note, when you place a stencil in, that stencil is locked to the camera. It's actually the vehicle that I'm bouncing around here. Now, these stencils are not just, these alphas aren't just black and white images, but many of them have properties and parameters here that we can play with. And in the square shape squeeze, I actually have 2 sliders I can play with, a hardness and a squeeze. And the hardness, I'm going to crank that up so that instead of a very blurry rectangle, we end up with something very hard edge. This is going to resemble the stripes on the car a lot better. It's also probably worth rotating the vehicle to get it to line up again a little bit closer with the directionality that I would like to get out of this. Now, if I bring this squeeze down, I can go and set this mask to match essentially what is in the reference image. So I've gone and done something a little bit like that. So here what's going to happen when I do my stroke, and I'm just going to make sure the entirety of the car here is covered by that. So what's going to happen when I go and run down the stroke here is it's only going to allow me to paint inside of the white area. Any of this dark area out here is completely masked out, and it won't see when I paint. The next thing I'm going to do is go and pick my paint job. Now, I'm going to pick a full-on red here. This is going to be 100. Now, even if that's not entirely the color that I want, I'm going to use that color as a baseline so that if I have to paint any other red elements on the vehicle, I can go and paint them that same red value. And if I need to tint it later, I'll go and tint it as a whole so I can add a levels to it and do that kind of thing. So now, I'll just make sure that my brush here is large enough, and I can go and just paint right along the vehicle, making sure that I get the entirety of this thing covered. Something like that. I may go in here and play with the alignment of my brush just to make sure that I am getting the entirety of this vehicle. I want to make sure that I don't leave out any little marks here. And I want to do this before I go and move the vehicle, because I'll never get this mask or this stencil to line up the same again. So now that that's done, I can go and clear the stencil, and we'll have a rotate of the vehicle and see how that worked. I'll switch back over to perspective, and I'll turn off the symmetry line here. And that did a pretty decent job. Some of the places where it didn't work so well are inside the grill, which doesn't concern me, as the interior of the grill is actually going to end up being chrome. And that looks to be pretty good. You can see that it actually painted a little bit on the ground here, or on the underside of the vehicle as well. It might be worth going in and cleaning that up as well. So if I go back into my brush settings here, and we go and check out the alignment, I'm going to put this back to the tangent wrap. And I'm going to switch over to the eraser real quick and just go in, clean up the underside of the vehicle. Now, normally this is not the end of the world if you leave a little bit of something like this, but since it's that obvious and easy to clean, we might as well go and do it. Okay. I've now got a brilliant white paint job with 2 red racing stripes here running along the top of the vehicle. And that is going to do it for my paint layer. I'm going to try and stay organized in my layers as I go, so I'm going to go in right away, add a folder, which I'll name Paint Job. And I'll place the stripes and the paint base inside the Paint Job folder. Okay, that looks pretty good. Moving on, I'm going to need to do something about the grill. I'm going to start with some chrome here. So I'm going to add a new fill layer, and I'm going to pull this outside of the paint job folder, and we'll shrink that back down. I'm going to go and rename this. This is going to be Chrome Base, maybe without the capital A. All right. Now I just need to make something that's going to look a little bit like chrome, and that's a fairly easy process to do. I'm going to keep the color almost where it is here. The metallic value, we'll turn that up. I don't need normal or height here, but I do want to, again, bring the roughness down until we're starting to get something that reads, again, a little bit more like chrome. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, this shouldn't exist on the entirety of the vehicle, as is the case now. I don't want an all-chrome car. So I'm going to add a mask here with color selection. This is going to allow me to pick with the eyedropper. And did not do, let me undo that, what I wanted it to. There we are. I'm going to pick on the trim going around the growing around the grill here like that, and that looks like it should be made of chrome. I do believe there is no other chrome on the actual body of the vehicle here. To go and check this out, I'm going to switch over to solo mode. This is going to give me a view of just this part of the vehicle, and indeed, the rest of the vehicle that I'm looking at here is actually all going to be the paint job, with the exception of one more thing. I'm going to go back to my display. The secondary thing I want to do is add some plastic here, both for the wheel wells as well as the internal parts of the grill. Okay, so this is going to be a fairly easy thing to do. First, I need to make a new base yet again. So I'm going to add another fill, and I'm going to rename this Black Plastic Base. And now I'm going to just adjust my settings here to make this look a little bit more like some black plastic. So again, I'll turn off the normal and the height, and I have color, metal, and rough. The color, I'm going to dip down into a fairly dark gray. The metallic value can rest at 0, and the roughness, I'm going to start bringing this up a little bit. Something maybe about here. Maybe down just a little bit. Okay, I'm pretty pleased with that. Now I just need to identify where I want black plastic to exist on my vehicle. So again, I'm going to add a black mask. And now we can go and add using our Polygon Fill here, and we can go and check to see what meshes or what polygons we would like to be part of this material. So I'm going to go to the element mode, and I'm going to go and select just the... It's not doing what I want it to. There we are. So I'm just clicking on each of these little bars here that go inside the grill. That is giving them that color. I'm also going to switch to UV Island here, and I'll go and select the inside of the grill as well. So if I go and look at what that looks like, I've now got a black plastic grill with a chrome going around it. That looks an awful lot like the one in the picture. Next, I'm going to have to go and do the wheel wells, and I'm going to do the little step here, the little step outside of the door, and then the rear wheel well as well. Now, there isn't a very clear separation in my wheel well at the back, but we'll kind of make what we can out of this. So I'm going to continue along with my Polygon Fill selection here. I'm going to go into the polygon mode, and I'm going to just click the polygons that are part of the wheel well and that are not part of the paint job. So this is going to be everything that exists around here. This probably would make sense to do with symmetry turned on in order to get both the driver's side and the passenger side simultaneously. I do want to double check that I'm not accidentally adding too much to my selection. And I think I'm going to add the entire underside here as well. All right, that's looking pretty good. Again, I'm going to continue this trend along as we get to the back, where the rear wheel well can get added to this selection as well. I'll switch back over to Polyfill, the UV islands, and I'll get the internal section of the wheel well. And I'm going to bring this along the underside of the bumper here as well. I think that's going to look pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to take a double check here around the vehicle, ensuring that I did indeed get everything selected that I wanted. It probably makes sense to add the bottom of the vehicle here as well. It's not necessarily going to be the black plastic here that I want, but it makes a little bit more sense to have that than the shiny white plastic. So I think that is going to look pretty darn good like that. Okay, so with that done, I've now got a first pass on this material ID. I'm not going to go any further because the rest of the vehicle, too, needs to get some texturing, needs to get some base colors on it, just so we can see what it's going to look like. So the next one, I'm going to go texture. We'll jump over and do the chrome elements. Now, the chrome elements, if I solo these out, these were based off the original concept art. All the elements that were going to be chrome in the car. But since I've moved to a different design, these are actually all not going to be chrome. And so I've got a couple of different materials here that I'm going to need to capture. First, I'm going to add a new fill layer to the chrome here. And I'm going to go and name this Rims Base. Now, the original design for this called for chrome rims on the wheels. However, that is not what's in my concept or what's in the version of this vehicle that I'm trying to emulate. And so I'm going to need to emulate what is there. This vehicle has black rims that are very shiny. And so I'm going to go and make these look a little bit more like the ones in the image. Might get just a little more shine out of that. So that works well like that. The bumpers, which are also part of this, should have the same matte black here as the wheel wells. Now, since I've already have this layer and this material built, I'm going to switch back over to my paint material ID, and I'm going to go and copy this layer. I'll head back into my chrome layer, and I'm going to go and paste this in. Now, I'm going to need to obviously do something with this black mask. So I'll add a black mask. And now I can go back into my Polygon Fill selection. And we'll select by element. And I'm going to grab just the front bumper and the back bumper, which are supposed to be the same matte black plastic here as the rest of the vehicle. The next thing that I want to do is the mirrors. So the mirrors currently are the same kind of shine and black that I'm getting in the hubs. And that's not the case. I need to make this essentially the same paint as what's on the vehicle. So I'm going to go and do the same thing here. Now I'm just going to let the autosave finish what it's doing. And maybe I'll pause the recording until that's done. Alright, now that the autosave has finished, I'm going to go and copy my layers from the paint base. So I'm going to go to the paint material ID. I'm going to go into the folder that I created called paint base. And I'm going to copy this layer. I'll head back into the chrome material ID, back into the layers, and I'll paste this in here like so. Now there are two different colors here that I need for the mirrors. A couple of things, actually, that I need for the mirrors. First, I'm going to need to make the same red paint job that is on the body of the vehicle present in the mirrors. So, again, that was made by grabbing just a pure red, like so. The only place that this paint job needs to exist is on the two bodies of the rear view mirrors. So I'm going to add a white mask to this, or rather a black mask. I'll go back into my polygon selection and I'll just go and select the islands that make up the mirrors. This should continue to give me the same black in here. Now I'm going to go into the black plastic and add that to the supports for the mirrors, again, as that's what's in my reference. And then I'm going to need to do something about my mirrors, which are currently just shiny black. So I'm going to have to add some chrome type looking stuff here. This is going to be of help because the door handle as well should be chrome. So I'm going to add a new fill layer, and again we'll remove the normal and the height. I'm going to go and turn the metallic value up and the reflection value down. I'll rename this Chrome Base. And I'm going to add a black mask, in which I'll go back into my polyfill selection. And I'll grab the door handle and the mirror. I'll flip over to the other side since I don't have symmetry currently turned on. And I'll add those two segments as well. Alright, that's reading pretty nicely. I have two more material IDs here that I need to add. The first that I'll do is the rubber. Now this exists only in 2 places on my vehicle. It's currently on the tires and on a tiny little bead of plastic here, or rubber, that I placed around my windscreen. I figured that would give me a very nice transition between the very shiny window and the very shiny paint. So if I go back into my layers now, I'm going to add a new layer. This is going to be a rubber base. And now I can go set some values here to make this look like rubber. So again, I'll choose a fairly dark gray. The metallic value can stay at 0, and the roughness is now going to go up quite a bit until I get something that's starting to read a little bit more like rubber. Not too bad. Now, while I'm here, I might as well do this while I'm here instead of coming back to this. I don't like this flat roughness value of just one consistent value over the entirety of the tire. So what I'm going to do with this roughness value is I'm actually going to enter this, and I'm going to go look for a grunge procedural in here and try and find something that I can use. Maybe we'll try this one to make it look like the tires just have a very not uniform value in it. Now, this has obviously gone way too shiny here, but I'm just actually looking at the patterns that I'm getting, and I do really like what I'm getting. So I'm going to add a levels to this now, and I'll switch the levels that I'm doing from the base color to the roughness. And now we can go and do things like invert the white and black until we get something that actually kind of gives us the look and effect that you would get out of a rubber tire. So just a little bit of variance in the placement. The other thing that this does really, really nicely is that if this vehicle were to be animated, since right now the tires are just perfect cylinders, you would have a hard time once they really start moving actually seeing that they're moving. And so having a sort of pattern or information here on the side of the tires, this is going to make it look a lot more like, you know, we're getting some kind of a repetition or a spinning in the animation. Good. So that works for the rubber base over the entirety of these things. So I'm going to leave the rubber as such and call that done and move into the final material ID, which is going to be the glass. I'll enter its layers here. We're going to go delete the default layer that appears and add a new fill layer. And in here, I'm going to go and start playing around with color. Now, because there's no interior to this vehicle, I don't want to do any kind of opacity. I don't want to do anything that's going to let us see that there's nothing in there. So I'm going to go with a fairly dark color. I'm going to do this in a little bit of a green tint, maybe a little bit more blue in that tint. And we'll turn off the normal and the height. And let's see, let's add some reflectivity to this. So it kind of reads a little bit more like being glass. So that works quite nicely, at least for the windows. I do have a issue with my headlights and my turn lights and my brake lights, where again they are using the same value assigned to the windows. So I'm going to need to add a paint layer here where we can start varying these things up a little bit. So I'm going to rename this layer. This is glass base. And now I'm going to go add a paint layer where we can go and paint values here that are a little bit more indicative of what these other elements are supposed to be. So obviously this red color is not going to be a value to me here. I'm going to go and do something a little bit kind of off-white. And I'll do that for the headlights because I believe that'll work nicely. So again, I'm going to turn on my symmetrical painting here so that I can get both of these at once. And I'll do the fog lights here at the same time. I don't necessarily want the turn signals to be this white, so I'm going to go into that color. And I'll bring this down into a nice bright orange. And we'll go and just paint that. I'll bring my brush size a little bit smaller here. Make sure I don't get any overlap. All right, that reads quite nice. I'm going to switch around to the back. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to go into my brush here. We're going to go to the alpha section and turn the hardness up on my brush. This is going to make it respond a little bit faster. Now, I'm not going to be entirely careful while painting the taillights because I still need to go and add some chrome here above them. And I'll do the same thing with the taillights. Again, just adding a brilliant red directly on top of where the taillights are, like so. Right, okay, so next, obviously, we're going to add the chrome. So I'm going to go and rename this Light Colors. And I'm going to add a new layer. This, again, is going to be a fill layer, and I'll call this Chrome Base again. And again, we'll go set some properties here for the chrome of completely metallic and not very rough. I'm going to add a black mask, and again, I'll go into my Polygon Fill selection. I'll select my ID, and I'm using UV islands here. And that will quite nicely clean up my taillights for me. And if I head back over to the front, where I've got these little cylinders that go around the fog lights and the turn signals, I'm going to go and click on those as well. And just like that, those now look a little bit more polished. All right. Excellent. So I'm really digging the way that this looks now. I've matched the colors from the reference image and the types of materials from the reference image. I've applied a basic color value and metalness value and roughness value to each of the polygons on the vehicle. What remains now is to really start selling this as a more realistic paint job. Right now, it just has basic values on everything, with the exception of maybe the tires, with a little bit of roughness that I placed there. And so what I'd like to do, this is going to look very cartoony and very out of place, and not very realistic, very... I don't want to use the word stylized because the modeling of the car is stylized, but it's definitely more of a cartoony look than what I'm going for. So the next thing to do is to go in and add a little bit more realism into this. First, I'm going to head back into my paint layer, and I'm going to go and add in just a little bit of dust and dirt collecting in the crevices. So if I head back over my layers here, I'm going to add a new layer. And I'm going to call this Dusty Dirt. In order to make this dirt, I'm going to do something in the brown range here. And I don't want it to be very dark, very saturated, but maybe something a little bit like that. I'll kill the normal and the height map here as well. I'm going to bring the roughness almost all the way up. And just so that I get something that kind of looks like... the type of dirt that you would get just kind of sitting in the crevices, almost mostly dust kind of thing. So here we'll add a black mask, and on that mask we'll add a generator, and on the generator we'll go and create a mask builder. So here is the mask builder, and we're going to let this populate here, the little teal line at the bottom here. This is the updating progress bar. So once that is done, we'll see that it has gone and set some preliminary values to what's happening here. These are obviously not the values we're going to want, but they are kind of a start. The first thing I'm going to do is use the triplanar version of projection. This is going to eliminate things like the dirt stopping when it hits the door. It'll give us a little bit more of a continuous dirt that goes right across our UV seams, and that'll look way better. The next thing I can do is go and play with some of the values here. So the ambient occlusion value is set to 1, meaning we're using all of the ambient occlusion. If I go in here, we've got a range and a contrast and a noise as well. The next is the curvature, and we can see that the curvature we're actually getting this to appear in a place where we don't want it. It's actually in the wrong place on the curvature. So if I take the curvature and I bring it all the way down, that's not quite doing what we want. I'm going to bring the curvature back up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the concave and the contrast values here in order to get something that looks a little bit better. So we don't want the convex. Turn that off. We want the concave. I'll turn that on. So the concave values are where it's going to be sitting inside of the little crevices and things like that. So that's going to look a little bit better. I'm going to play the, turn the range down just a little bit here. I don't want it to be too overpowering. And I'm going to turn up the smoothness just to kind of blur it. Oh, it's a little too blurry. Just to kind of blur it back a little bit so it's not too overpowering. I want the dirt to be there, but I don't want it to be just too overpowering. My goal here is not to make an overly dirty car. It's just to make it look like a regular, everyday use kind of car. So that's good for the curvature. Everything else here I think I'm going to be pretty good with. I may want to go in, so the style of dirt that we're getting on here, these grunge that's being applied here, this is being applied through a grunge map. And if I go into the grunge here, it's using a image to project that grunge. This is where it's coming from, somewhere in here, custom grunge. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tell it to use the custom grunge. Use custom grunge is off. I'm going to say on. Again, we'll get our little progress bar. And you can see how the grunge disappears. I'm just getting the dust in the crevices here now. And now what I can do is if I go down to the custom grunge 1, I can go and pick on this. And again, I'm going to look up grunge and just find another one of these grunge maps. Now, the purpose for this, the reason for doing this, is that this is procedural texturing. It's reusing the same numerical values over and over and over again. And so, if you use the default grunge that's there, everybody that textures will get the same textures. You'll end up with the same values in the same places as everybody else. So I always like to kind of go in and mess around with things as best I can, just to make sure I'm getting enough uniqueness on my very vehicle, again, to make it a little bit more separate and different than all of the others. So this dust is, or dirt, is also appearing on my plastic fenders. It's appearing and collecting inside of the crevices between the bumper and the grille. And it's starting to read pretty nicely. I'm going to copy that layer. So we're going to go in and copy layers. And we'll jump into the other ones, the rubber, where I'll paste it. Eventually. Now, one of the other options you have when you paste as well is to paste as a instance layer. And what the instance layer is going to do is it's going to give you the ability to have one master level that you adjust in all your different material IDs, play catch up. This might actually be a little bit of a better thing to do with the dirt here. So if I go to paste, I can paste layer as instance. So this time when we get the dust instance up here, again, this is appearing on now the rubber. This means that if I hop back into the paint and I go to change the color of the dirt, it changes on everything. And so it's not just on one value or one material ID here, but instancing it allows me to have a little bit more control. I'll jump into the chrome and I'll paste this as an instance as well. I'll jump into the glass And I'll add the glass as well. Now, in the instance of the glass here, I'm going to actually want to add a little bit more dust to this, a little bit more of the dirt. It did a pretty good job of, again, using my same predefined settings here and just appearing in the crevices and really staying away from most of the flat surfaces. However, I would like to put on something here that's going to essentially look like fake windshield wiper marks. And the way to do that is, well, I need more dirt. So I can go and add a little bit more dirt, or I could just go into this guy. Again, he's got no instances here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a new fill layer. I'm on my glass layers here, so I'm going to add another fill layer. And this fill layer, I'm going to use the same color. So I'm just going to go eyedropper this from the dirt. And I'm going to go and turn off the normal, turn off the height. Again, the roughness will be way up there. And this is going to be dust on the windows. I'm going to add a black mask so it clears all of the dust. And now to place the dust on the windows, just so I don't get a uniform dust, I'm going to go into my brushes and I'm going to go grab in here something that's already got a little bit of a texture to it, a little bit of a pattern built in. So here's dirt spots, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to select that brush. So with the mask now selected, when I go with my tablet here and make my draw size a little bit bigger, maybe something a little bit like that. And maybe what we'll do is also go into the flow and just pull this back here a little bit. The idea is that I can now go in and paint on this windscreen some of this kind of splotchy patterning on the windows that'll just make them look a little dirtier, but more importantly is going to give me something that the windshield wipers can wipe away. So I'm not going to go too crazy on the side windows, only because the side windows don't have windshield wipers, so I'm not going to be able to clean it off. And I still want them to read as being windows. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is do the windshield wiper marks on this here. So I'm going to go and reset my brush back. And what I can do now is literally just scale up my brush until it's about the size of a windshield wiper. And I can just click. I'll have to make sure that we're painting in the correct color, which is meant to be black. And if I click on that now, let's see if I can bring this around. We're going to get this kind of wiped, clean mark. Now in the front, I'll do the same thing here. Let's bring the light around. And this time, I'm going to do two of these things. One here and one here. And that, again, just gives it a little bit more realism. Which, again, you know, is completely hilarious because there are no windshield wipers modeled for this vehicle. But again, it's one of those things that we just kind of read as being correct. So there's a little bit of dust now on this thing. Now the level of wear and tear that you put into this is, you know, going to be completely up to you. We can brush off some of the paint and have some metal exposed. I personally don't want my car that damaged. I don't want it that dirty either. I just want to kind of make it look a little bit more, you know, everyday wear and tear type of thing. I am going to go into, however, my paint job. And I'm going to add another layer here down at the bottom. So I'm going to make a new paint layer. We'll drag this down to the bottom. And I'm going to rename this paint layer Additional Normals. So, additional normals. Obviously, with a name like that, we're going to be painting in the normal channel. Now, the idea with this additional normals layer is that not everything was modeled in the high poly that I wanted present in my normal map. There was a few things that, just out of the topology that I had, or the fact that they did not appear in silhouette, they were unnecessary to do. And the nice thing about those is that they end up being things that we can add later. I'm going to head over to the hard surface normals here. And here's a large collection of normal maps that ship with the software. And if I just grab one of these here and drag it into my brush on top of the normal, and I bring my brush size nice and big here, I can use this to emulate the opening for a fuel tank on the side of my vehicle. Something that was not present in the high poly, but should still be there. Now, one of the issues with painting additional normals on things like this is that I'm not getting any dust or dirt here appear along this shape. There's a discrepancy between where the dirt appears and where it doesn't. So, let's go and fix that. To fix that, I'm going to add an anchor to this layer. The anchor can use the additional normals name that I've provided. And if I head up to where I did my dirt, up here, dusty dirt, mask builder, I'm going to head down to the micro normal, and I'm going to go grab an anchor point from that list, which apparently is not letting me do that. Perhaps they've removed this functionality. Which is interesting. The anchor points are there. I just don't seem to be able to grab them. So let's go and turn on. The micro normal is on already. So if I head down to the micro normal, yeah, interesting. I cannot grab the anchor point to apply it. So this appears to be something that is newly changed in the software here. It's a list of my instances. Yeah, I do not seem to be able to grab the anchor point. Now, I'm wondering if this is due to the mask builder being legacy here, probably meaning that it is an older version. Let me try the mask editor instead. And again, I'm going to have to go and play with these settings here to make sure that I get the same thing. But if I go to the micro normal from here, I'm still locked out from the anchor points. So I'm going to hit undo. It looks like the anchor points have been changed in this version, and that I am unable to attach anything to them. Okay. That is kind of a bummer. I'm going to remove the anchor. I don't know what point that has anymore. But apparently we can't do anything with the anchors. That used to be functionality that was in here. I did just update, I should mention. I did just update the software to 2018.3.0 a minute before recording this video, so that would make sense if there was a change here that I didn't expect. Okay, well, let's go do some additional normals here on the other materials. I'm going to go head over to the glass, and I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to add a new paint layer here, and again, we'll go and name this addition normals. Good enough. And I'm going to want to paint a map here that matches the headlight shape. You know, instead of getting just this dome that is currently there, it would be nice to actually have something that looks a little bit more like an actual headlight. To do this, I'm going to pop over into 3ds Max. Now, I can use the normals that are here, but I'm not overly fond of these ones. They're normals that ship with the software, so they're ones that everybody has access to. So I'm going to go and actually just go and make my own. So I'm going to start with a sphere, as this is the shape of those headlights. And I'm going to try and make something a little bit more interesting out of a shape here. I'll bring up the number of sections on this until it's a little bit higher. So maybe let's do 64 sections here. And I'm going to convert this to an editable poly. I'm going to go to my top view, and we'll just delete 1/2 of this mesh, which is unnecessary. I'm going to get rid of exactly half. Make sure I get rid of these other polygons. So I'm going to go to my front view here, and in order to make this look a little bit more like a headlight type of shape, I'm going to go and center it in the world. So I'll make sure that it appears here at the origin, like so. And then let's see, I'm going to go and make something that looks a little bit more headlight looking. So maybe what I'll do is grab an edge. I'll do, let's see, I'll start with this edge, and I'm going to go into my dot ring, and I'll dot ring that selection, which should give me a symmetrical selection all the way through. I'll turn off the grid. I'm going to go and extrude these vertices, or these edges here, and we'll turn both of these settings down. So I'm just going to open them up a little bit, like so, which will look good. And let's see, let's grab a center line, which we can loop and dot ring as well. And I think maybe I'm going to go and adjust my dot ring here. I'm going to go up a couple of segments. And let's extrude this as well at the same setting. And if I just show you what this looks like, I'm sort of getting something that reads a little bit more like the detail you would get on a headlight type of thing. So I'm just going to make this a high poly version of this thing here. So I'm going to reduce this down. And let's see, let's go and add a chamfer. And I'm going to do this the unsmoothed. And we'll just bring it up a little bit. Make sure this is set to 0.5. And I'll add a turbo smooth with a couple of iterations. Again, I'm not looking to model anything really fancy here. I just want something that looks really nice and clean. And more importantly, like a headlight shape. So that's not too bad. I could use that kind of thing. Another thing that we could do as well, and I'm doing this in Max here, but you could do this in Maya as well. There's no real difference here. But essentially any rounded shape that you could make, if you were to go look at what a headlight looks like, and again, I'm going to make sure that I'm paying attention to rounded headlights here. It's essentially this kind of shape here that I want to capture. You know, all these really tiny thin lines here meant to break up the lighting. And so maybe what I could do here as well, another version of this, would take place in Photoshop. So let's go look at making one of these things in Photoshop here as well. Okay, now that Photoshop's open, I'm going to create a new image here. And I'll do this at 1024 by 1024. And let's see, I don't really necessarily need it to be grayscale. We'll go RGB. Okay, so here is the image. Now, I'm going to do this in, let's see, I'm going to invert my colors here. So I'm going to do this in black. And I'm going to paint some details on here in white. So the first thing that I want to do is paint some stripes on here. So I'm going to do this with a, let's do a new image at 64 pixels by 64 pixels. And I'm just going to go and make a couple of stripes really quick here. So let's see, 8 pixels. And we'll fill that in black. And then we'll, let's see, copy and paste that here. And paste it here. And one here. So just get this striping pattern. And I'm going to go edit. And we'll define a pattern, which we'll call stripes. And what I'll do now is on my image here, we're going to go to the paint bucket. I'll switch from foreground to pattern, and I'll go and grab the stripes that I just made and fill that. So that's pretty good as a starting point. Let's see. Let's go take this layer. We're going to go to Filter, 3D, and Generate Normal. Okay, so we've got a starting point now. I think what I would like to do is just add an additional detail on top of this. So again, I'm going to fill this in white. And I think just with my selection tool here, I'm going to go and make some additional selections. Something through here. And essentially just make something that looks a little bit more mechanical. I'll fill those in white. And I'm just going to reproduce the last filter. And let's see, we'll set this as an overlay. And with the blending mode set to overlay, we'll just turn off the blue channel here to make sure that we get an accurate level of copy. And I'm just going to try and move this to a position where it doesn't interfere so much. I don't know, maybe we'll even zoom in on it. Let's see how this works. Okay, so I'm going to go save this. We'll make a custom hard edge map here. I'll just name this headlight, like so. So now what I can do is if I head back into Designer, or Painter rather, and I open a File Explorer, or Windows Explorer, I'm going to go to my desktop where I will go and drag my headlight alpha, or my normal, now into this category. I'm going to say that, yeah, this is an imported object here. I want to define this as a texture. And really, I just want this for the current session. We don't want to keep this as part of the software. So I'm going to hit Import. And there it is now there. So, with the headlights selected, I'm going to go into my normals here. And I'm going to go and place this on top of the headlight. It's not bad. I think I'm going to make it a little bit larger. And now I'm actually starting to get a little bit more detail here, reminiscent of what a light looks like. I'm going to do the same thing here with the fog lights and the turn signals. Like so. And now that reads a little bit more like being a headlight instead of just this kind of dome that I was getting before. I can do something similar to the back here. If I were to go into my brush settings now and I turn off my alpha, I can actually stamp this directly onto the tail light. And I'm going to enlarge it a little bit, and I'll stamp it on the, maybe a little less. I'm just going to stamp it on the, let me undo here. I think I'm going to make this even bigger. There we go. Excellent. Now all I need to do is just remove that from the chrome where it exists, where it was never meant to be. So I'm going to do this with the eraser brush, and I'm going to jump out of perspective, or out of my 3D, into 2D. And this is going to allow me to see where those chrome bits are. The other thing that I could do if I didn't want to do it this way, go back to 3D, is I can also just add a white mask here with polyfill in black. I could go and click on those sections. And that would remove it from there. I could do this to the front too, just to make sure I didn't paint any of that in places it wasn't meant to be. Okay, excuse me. Now, once you're done and you're pleased with the look of your vehicle, since my goal is to get this into the Unreal Engine, we need to now export our textures and get them into the Unreal Engine. I'm going to head to File and Export Textures. I'm going to go and choose a default folder here in which I'll place my images. So I'm going to go to the stylized car. I'm going to go to, let's see, Images. And I'm going to create a new folder in here, and I'll call this Textures, and I'll use that folder. From the configurations, I'm going to go down and choose the Unreal 4 Packed. My dilation is set to infinite, and I'm okay with PNG and 8-bit. So then I'll just hit Export, and I'm going to let the software run through its process. Now, word of warning, we are going to get a warning, or several warnings. The Unreal 4 Packed is using a couple of material IDs that I am not using in my texturing. The opacity and any kind of self-illumination. So the software is going to return a warning saying, we exported your textures as you wanted. However, there was an issue. This is not going to be an issue at all. It just means that our alpha channels on a couple of our maps are going to be empty. And that's okay. That's kind of exactly what we want. So I'm going to let this run through its process. Again, we're doing this at 4K, larger than it really needs to be. But once it is completed, we're going to go double check in the folder where they've been exported that everything is as was expected. And then we'll begin doing some rendering in the next video. Okay, with that done, as predicted, some warnings. I'm going to open my folder to go take a look at where these images were exported. And we'll see that our log did indeed say the opacity and the emissive are missing. And so that's not the end of the world. And if I go look in the folder, here are now the images that were exported. I should have 12 of them. That's going to be 3 for each of our 4 channels. And that's now it. Okay. So with that done, we've completed the texturing of the vehicle. Thanks for watching. And in the next video, we'll import our vehicle into Unreal, where we'll set up a little scene and some lighting and spit out a very quick turntable of our vehicle. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.